Hello, and welcome to What is Innovation, the podcast that explores the reality of a word that is in danger of losing its meaning altogether. This podcast is produced by Outlast Consulting, LLC, a boutique consultancy that helps companies use innovation principles to solve their toughest business problems. I'm your host, Jared Simmons, and I'm so excited to have Grace Chiang Nicolette. Grace Chiang Nicolette is the Vice President of Programming and External Relations for the Center for Effective Philanthropy. She works closely with the President on the organization's partnerships, outreach efforts, communications, and innovative programming, including oversight of the CEP's biennial conference for foundation executives. Prior to joining CEP, Grace co-founded a philanthropy advisory firm in Shanghai that identifies investments in high-potential nonprofits and social enterprises in China. She was named a Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum in 2011. She began her career working in finance in New York at Citigroup, and then in Shanghai at a semiconductor manufacturing company. Grace has an executive education certificate from Harvard's Kennedy School in Global Leadership and Public Policy, and graduated with honors from the University of Pennsylvania as a Benjamin Franklin Scholar with a BA in Economics and International Relations. She resides with her husband and 2 children in Cambridge, where they are active members of their church. Grace, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Jared.
Oh, I'm super excited. I know we met maybe 4 years ago, I think, at an event, and it was a pleasure to meet you, and I learned so much from our conversation, and glad we've been able to stay connected, and looking forward to this chat on record.
Definitely. Yeah.
So why don't we dive right in? I mean, we've kind of touched on a lot of the different places you've been, things you've seen, roles you've played. Based on your experience, what is innovation?
Innovation to me is discovering what works best and bringing it to the table.
Interesting. Discovering what works best. So that aspect of discovery, tell me more about that.
Yeah, I think that sometimes the answers already exist. In fact, a lot of the times the answers are already there. That's definitely true in the field of philanthropy. And then sometimes the answers don't exist and we have to go out and find them. But finding what works best, bringing it to the fore, you know, it's not doing something new for the sake of doing something new, but
Mhm.
doing something that's effective.
I like your definition because it's got aspects to it. So
Mhm.
if I think about the discovery and I think about bringing it to the table, which of those 2 elements in your career, in your experience, is tougher, discovering it or bringing it to the table?
Hmm. Wow, that's a that's an interesting question. I think both have their unique challenges. I mean, I think that sometimes when I think about, my world is, the social sector and civil society, and discovering what works can be very complicated, much more complicated, I think, than in other sectors. And then once you discover something, similar to some challenges in other sectors, bringing that to the right people, bringing that to the decision makers, bringing that to the people that a policy or intervention may impact, and bringing them along with it
Mhm.
is so important. So both of those pieces are really vital to success. You can't have one without the other.
Right.
I think in philanthropy, there can be a lot of really top-down thinking that like donors and funders, foundations know better what people need than the people themselves. And I think that there really is an element of well, one, hubris in that, and two, there is a challenge for folks to be in dialogue with communities that are really different than their community, and how do you bring people along, or how do you listen to them and give them what they want?
Mm. Yes, I can imagine there's in that world that you're describing, there's inertia on both sides. You know, the way things are in the donor world and the way things are in the world you're attempting to impact and change.
Mhm.
And if I think about your definition of innovation, it almost makes me wonder which one is the table. You know,
Mm,
are you bringing the the resources to the communities, or are you building a bridge to bring the community closer to the resources?
yeah, that's a fantastic way of looking at it. It's certainly both are very challenging, I think, but really listening well to communities and understanding things from their perspective, I think sometimes seems more challenging. It's the actual giving of the money is not the hard part. It's the, really understanding what works and listening to them.
Right.
It's interesting because you mentioned inertia. I definitely feel like that is definitely true of philanthropy. And I think that we often see a lot of new philanthropists, newly minted ones, coming in and saying, the way that things are with nonprofits is totally broken, and I'm going to come in with some new ideas and I'm going to, move fast and break things.
Right.
And they quickly learn that it's a really different ballgame in philanthropy than it is, let's say, in the business world. And so,
Yeah.
for those of us who work in employment, there's always a little bit of like, okay, yeah, we we hear you, we've heard this before, and
Mhm.
it's more encouraging when we hear a new donor saying, actually, I'm here with a learning posture, and there's a lot I don't know, and I'm here to learn, and there's a learning curve, like with this, like with many things, and so that I think tends to be a more
Mhm.
realistic and humble and successful approach to philanthropy.
Do you notice any differences in those two communities, those two types of sort of new philanthropists? Do you notice a difference in the outcomes of those, those two different approaches?
Yeah. So, at the Center for Effective Philanthropy, we do these assessments for foundations. And one of the things that we ask their nonprofit partners is, how well does this foundation listen? And what is the relationship you have? And we have all these different measures for relationship. And we do find that the better the relationship, the more likely a nonprofit is to say that the donor is having an impact because the donor has listened to what the needs are and things like that. So I would say that there are certainly donors who take a really harder kind of top down approach saying, you don't know what you're doing. You need to come and I'm going to tell you how to fix things, or you need to do this program the way that I want it done. And then there's the other kind of donor that really listens well, may have their own opinions for sure, and expertise to bring to the table, which is usually highly valued by nonprofits.
Hmm.
But that they are open to learning and don't come in with a preset agenda. That definitely we do see as being more successful.
Mm, that makes sense. That makes sense. And how, as you create these relationships and create these connections, I guess, how is your role? Does your role evolve in that process?
Hmm. You mean my role in particular or the organization's?
Yes, probably your organization that, if you've got the community and the folks that need the support and you've got the donors, how does your role evolve from, say, creating that, identifying that opportunity through to, how long do you stay involved?
Got it. Yeah. So we don't actually recommend projects. We basically provide data and insight on how funders, whether donors or foundations, can be more effective in their giving. So it's things like, as I mentioned, like how well are you listening? You know, what are the things that nonprofits are saying that equal, the most impact for nonprofits? Elevating some of the best practices in philanthropy and grant making. And so it's interesting because over time, there has become sort of a body of, I would call it science, around what makes for a good foundation donor, for instance.
Mhm.
And, when we do an assessment, we are working with an individual foundation, their staff and board. We give them their results in comparison with other funders that are their size, that are like them, as well as all of the funders in our sort of data set universe. And we really identify specific areas that they're uniquely, you know, their strengths are uniquely, and then also areas for improvement. And then we, give them suggestions on how to think about making some of the change. So, for instance, a lot of foundations really struggle with, okay, they only give 1 year grants, for instance, or they only give project grants.
Right.
And we may come in and, the findings from their assessment show that nonprofits are needing multi-year unrestricted general operating support grants. So we would say, like, let's have a conversation about that. Like, what are the ways? We're not saying you need to throw open the doors all at once and give that kind of funding. That might be too much to ask,
Right.
too much for the board to take all at once. But are there a few grantees, for instance, or nonprofits that you're funding that you know their mission inside and out, you know that they are doing good work, and so therefore you can fund them in a different way that actually supports their long-term sustainability.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and so we're really catalyzing a lot of those conversations. And then folks take our assessments over and over again. And so when we do it the next time, we can see, hey, actually, nonprofits are really resonating with the changes that you've made, or these changes didn't quite resonate, like that kind of thing. So it's sort of an ongoing, continuous improvement tool.
Yeah, yeah. And I thought, I mean, looking at the data and the types of reports you generate and all those things, I assumed you had to create those relationships. Like, but you're working on behalf, I mean, you're generating the data and
Hmm.
supporting. That's amazing. Because I come from consumer packaged goods world, and to be able to generate the kind of data you generate and to have views from both sides
Hmm.
is a very tough thing if you aren't the one creating that relationship. So
Yeah.
I almost assumed that you were, and it's impressive that your data and your insights uh, are impactful enough for people to just proactively come to the table like that.
Hmm. And, we work with folks who fund, the whole gamut of issue areas. So it's not,
Yeah,
specific to an issue area like education or animals or anything like that. And so I think, there are lessons to be had, across issue areas of the actual practice of being a donor. I mean, I feel like there are organizations out there that tell you why to give, like, what are your values, the where to give, and even like the structuring, like the how to give.
hmm,
And our sweet spot is how do you become more effective as a donor? So like you know, the learning curve. And so folks like Ford Foundation, Gates Foundation, all the way down to tiny family foundations and a lot of community foundations
right.
use our work to improve. We're really trying to make the dollars go further,
Yeah,
basically.
yeah. That is fascinating. How does your scorecard or your definition of success as an organization, does that look different from sort of say what you set out for your clients? Is that how does that look different?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our clients being funders, a lot of them do have endowments.
Mm,
So sort of managing to a operational budget is, I mean, obviously they have operational budgets, but it's different, right? Like we are a nonprofit. We do have earned revenue from our assessments,
mhm.
um, which we break even on, and then we also are half grant funded.
Right.
And so, I think that there are ways that, for instance, we offer a foundation staff survey. So for foundations that have staff of 15 or more, things like how aligned are you with the mission? How aligned are you with the board? How clearly uh, has the mission been communicated to you? Do you plan to leave anytime in the next? It's an anonymous survey, but our staff actually takes that. Every year, and we actually compare ourselves to the data set, and then we have some
Mm,
pretty honest conversations. We run the crosstabs on, are women having a different experience in the organization? Are people with lower tenures having a different experience? Are people of color having a different experience? And then we have a really honest conversation on what our strengths are and then where we want to improve. And that's always a huge highlight. It's just really rich. Definitely a point in time where we really sort of reinforce our culture in this really beautiful way, where
mm,
we talk
yeah.
about like how we want to improve and all of that. So yeah, so that's one way that we sort of make a tie between our external work and our kind of internal, uh, like the measurement of our impact.
That's fantastic. It's so important to be intellectually sort of consistent.
Hmm.
It really starts to break down when you're selling data, when you're selling insights, but
Yeah.
you're not really driving, you don't have a culture driven by data and insights internally.
Yes,
So
that's right.
that can only last so long
Yes.
before the wheels start to fall off.
Yeah.
It's something that I've seen in a lot of research and development organizations where you hire a lot of data driven, insight focused people to serve your consumer
Hmm.
or your customer, and then you neglect to leverage their insights and their thoughts internally. It's very
Yeah.
easy for those for folks to identify those inconsistencies and start to feel a bit of tension.
Yes. we're holding up a mirror to a lot of foundations to say, like, this is what things look like.
Yeah.
And then, we definitely have to hold that mirror up to ourselves. So, within the nonprofit world, there's a lot of conversations now about racial equity, and it's like the composition of boards and staffs. Like, is it racially and diverse in other dimensions? And so that's something that we take very seriously as well. And when it comes to hiring, I think one of the things I've been really encouraged by is that we've really tried to walk the talk when it comes to really diversifying our candidate pool.
Mm.
So we have folks on our HR team who do a fantastic job of that. And then we also post salaries, so that there's no inequity in terms of,
Really?
yeah.
Wow.
And so and everyone essentially makes, the same amount if they're doing the same job. And so
Right.
there really isn't a case where, if there was an audit that somehow, someone would be paid a lot more for doing the same role. We also redact names and last names and school names from resumes during the interview process. So implicit bias can be
Yeah.
curbed a bit. And so, it's not about, oh, I went to this school too, and now we're like buddies, but really, can this person do the job? And we want the best person for the job, not the person that you know has a similar last name to us or went to
Right.
a name brand school. In fact, we may not even need a college degree for certain roles, and we don't want that to be something that we end up discriminating against either. And so I think, yeah, on those dimensions, I think it's been really neat to see. We've kind of done internal innovation around how we do the work. That way, we can also share with our clients, like, it can be done.
Right. Right. Yeah, it just gives you a level of authenticity and integrity in
Mhm,
your dealings with your clients that a lot of other insight-driven firms don't have. I mean, I
mhm,
sometimes wonder, why companies don't ask the reflective question to their advisors,
mhm.
"Oh, you need to be more diverse." How diverse is your organization?
Yeah.
It's amazing that space, as you know, has become very crowded right now,
Mhm,
in terms of a lot of very old, very established firms and companies and the like
mm,
getting into the diversity and inclusion space, and
yeah.
the ability to have those conversations with integrity and authenticity and
Mhm.
consistency is just mathematically impossible for some of the organizations
Yeah,
that are doing that kind of advising right now to be practicing what they preach.
yeah. And also, like, following the science on it, right? I feel like there is enough research out there around, like, what kinds of diversity trainings are more or less helpful, to actually, like, moving the needle forward.
Yes.
And I think that there's a lot to be said about not just going with the flow, checking a box with this, but actually working with someone who has really dove into the research and knows, like, what works and actually knows how to bring people along. So yeah, I agree. There's just so much out there right now, but finding quality in people who walk the talk is really important.
Yeah, it definitely is. As you think about sort of the foundations, and you said, you work with big and small, household names and the like.
Mhm.
What are some of the insights that you've garnered from being able to look across how all these different foundations approach innovation, how they leverage your data? You know, what are some of you don't have to get into specifics, obviously, but
Mhm.
what are some of the things that you've seen in your industry?
Yeah. Well, a lot of the larger foundations have learning and evaluation departments. So they actually have people on staff
Hmm.
whose role is to evaluate the efficacy of their programs, as well as ensure that the staff are kind of learning and growing and developing in their knowledge base. And so that's really encouraging. And that's obviously not something that all foundations can take on, but we tend to work with a lot of those kinds of departments.
Sure.
I think that, like, it's interesting because I think that there are a lot of actual innovations I can think of in the field, like, so many things that we take for granted in life now, like the 911 system or Sesame Street, or even like the Green Revolution. I mean, some of these are a little more controversial, but like
Sure.
these are all funded by philanthropy. And so there's tremendous innovation there. We've been watching, there's been a lot of focus, obviously, in the last year on racial justice and philanthropy, especially after the death of George Floyd.
Mhm.
And there are foundations who are raising these huge bond offerings and then, giving the money away to social justice organizations.
Wow.
And that's sort of the confluence of the way that the markets are now, that it makes sense for them to do that. But that's relatively new and very exciting.
Hmm.
Um, I think that there's a lot more collaboration. So there are like donor collaboratives, there are people making what they call big bets. So really putting down like big chunks of money to really move the needle on something.
Mhm.
So all of those I think have been really exciting. At the same time, I would say, back to my definition of like discovering what works. I mean, a lot of our research has uncovered that the practice of good grant making often does come down to things that aren't necessarily new or sexy. It's things like, as I mentioned before, listening really well.
Right.
It's having a real honest, reflective approach of like how much power as a donor am I willing to give up and cede to the people that I'm trying to help.
Mm.
Because giving them unrestricted support, for instance, versus a project grant, that might be a process of building trust. But it's sort of those quiet things, like being a genuinely good partner,
Right.
that may not be in the papers, but actually are what moves the work forward. And so I would say there's, a lot of innovation in a sort of headlines perspective,
Sure.
but I think that sometimes it's the quiet work, day in, day out, uh, that just makes a huge difference as well. It's sort of the similar tension between like big, gifts versus lots of individuals giving small gifts.
Mm.
Both are really important.
Right, right. I think that just kind of reflecting on, I spent some time in the nonprofit world and thinking back on the different types of funding we had and received and the amount of time and effort and energy we put into, seeking that funding out
Yes.
relative to the amount of time effort we put into fulfilling the mission
Yes.
was always something I had a certain level of discomfort about.
Hmm.
And it was something I actually tried for us to work against in a couple of different ways. One was simplifying the approach, our approach to our work,
Yeah.
and the other was really developing a strategy around how we were going to acquire that funding,
Mm.
and then building our operation in a low risk way around that,
Yes.
so that we could get low to mid effort way supported what we were planning to do.
Yeah.
And just kind of listening to you kind of unpack those things brought back a lot of memories because I was new to the nonprofit space when I got involved. I guess everyone is, but just the ongoing education of, okay, well, you know, we need this, so we should go talk to these people. Yeah, well, you go talk to them, and then you
Mhm.
talk to this person, and then you do this, and then you got to cultivate the relationship and
Yeah.
these things, and all of that is important. But when you talk about the tension between things, to me, that is the tension that I identify
Yes.
with most from my time in the.
Yeah. So, I mean, that is a real dynamic. And, there are lots of horror stories out there that folks working in nonprofits, you know, for any amount of time can tell about like they spent so much time on, a grant report, application only to have, and then like lots of, feedback too, but then only to have it dinged. One of the things I found interesting is this is not a widespread practice, but some funders are actually compensating nonprofits now for the application time.
Now that's innovative.
Yes. Um, and when it comes to reporting, so, after a grant, concludes, there's usually a report that's due. We definitely have funders who just have a phone conversation with us
Mm,
around that, and they recognize that they want to minimize the time we're spending. They obviously, I mean, it's that whole let's smash the idea that there is a tension between stewardship and control of like how the
yeah,
funds were spent and like these really onerous kind of reporting requirements. And
yeah.
so it's a phone conversation. They often have said, hey, if you have another report that you've already written for this work, or do you
Mhm.
want to just give us your annual report from last year?
Yeah.
uh, and that is like music to our ears.
Oh,
It's like, yes, you did your due diligence and you know us and you know that we spent this money well. And thank you for not making this super onerous for us, even after we've received the money.
Right. Oh, that I'm so glad to hear that. That's that's fantastic. And I would be particular if I were involved in, working with the CEP directly. I would be
Mhm.
particularly concerned with being kind to you all, given the given your place in the industry.
You would think, but I have seen some things.
Oh my goodness.
So it's just interesting is that like that funder nonprofit dynamic
Hmm.
is such a powerful one. Like our president has said publicly many times, he's like, you would think of all people, like he would be willing to, say everything that needs to be said when a funder was being unreasonable. But even he holds back
Yeah.
because and that's part of why we exist, right? Is just to really kind of chip away at that so that there can be more listening of what nonprofits really need and less of a power dynamic. But it is such a strong dynamic that really can impede the work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It can, especially, there's this, I think there's kind of an S curve almost of size relative to distraction. You're
Hmm.
small, raising the money is a big distraction because you have a small staff, and
Yes.
so it's a big percentage of your effort. And then you grow a little bit, and that goes down. But then there's a second sort of wave where
Hmm.
you're so big now, you require a different kind of support model.
Yes.
It requires
Yep.
more funding, which means you have to change your approach, and which means it goes back up again as a distractor.
Yes.
And I do think there's something to be said, and I've heard you talk about this, for not seeing it as a distraction so much as a different way, a different aspect of fulfilling a mission.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's bringing people along, helping them to see, to join the work.
Right.
That's also an important piece of it.
Exactly. Important to frame it that way because it's another form of discovery
Hmm.
that lets you help your organization get to where you want it to go.
Yeah.
So one last question.
Hmm.
It's been a great conversation. Every time we talk, my brain just goes off in a lot of different directions. So I'm wondering if you would have any advice for innovators out there.
Hmm. Yeah. I think my advice would be let's not innovate just for the sake of innovating, that there's lots of well-trod ground out there.
Mm.
And sometimes what I think of as innovative, there can actually be a really strong thread that ties to the past.
Sure.
So like I think about Hamilton the musical, right? Like it was so innovative, partially because it is rooted in like a true story from the past, but it's a totally new way of doing it, new and not new, right? Like, and so I don't know. I
Mm.
just think that I take a lot of inspiration from that paradigm of like when we need to find a solution,
Yeah.
we're not alone. We don't need to feel like we need to come up with everything. Are there things that we can study from the past? People we can talk to who are experts, who can inform, and maybe it's something that meets in between. And so that's why innovation can be so squishy,
Right. Yeah.
but it's also, at the end of the day, again, discovering what works best.
Yes. I think the element of newness and innovation, the fact that something doesn't have to be new to be innovative, doesn't necessarily have to be novel to be innovative. It could be discovered in the present. It could be discovered in the distant past.
Hmm.
It's just about bringing it to the table in a way that makes it effective and impactful for the world.
Yeah.
Grace, thank you so much for your time. It's great to see you and talk to you again. And I really appreciate you joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this week's show. You can drop us a line on Twitter at Outlast LLC, OUTLAST LLC, or follow us on LinkedIn where we're Outlast Consulting. Until next time, keep innovating, whatever that means.